Hey guys, what's cracking? Godspan here, coming at you with another deck update. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite deck in Standard, the Kiseki no Unmeo, Rezael Vita. Now, with the release of set 5, we got a very huge wave of support for Rezael. Some good, of course, and also some bad, but the main pieces here are very noteworthy and have radically altered the deck in terms of its win condition image and also in its ability to push powerfully. However, that said, I am going to be sharing with you guys today my personal take on the list. Now, for those of you who have been following meta trends, you'll know that Rezael tends to be a Caterpillar kind of deck. This bolsters the deck's early game and also gives it more card advantage. That said, I'm not a proponent of Caterpillar, so today I'll be sharing with you my personal deck instead, which relies more on an even balance between offense and defense and takes it into a more grindy win condition. No worries though, no church order engine. We are not playing hostage Rezael either. This is more of a basic build your own kind of Rezael that utilizes different pieces for more of a sword and shield type game plan. Now, with all that preface being out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into it. I hope you enjoy. So, starting off the ride line as tradition, not much has changed here. We're starting with the starter of Wings Aspiration Soel. This is just purely for flavor. It could be whatever you want, so I just chose the one for Rezael. And then moving on to the grade 1, this is actually the one change, which is Knight of Heavenly Lasting Tranquilia. Now, if you'll recall, I was running Ventesta last time around when I did this deck profile, and the reason why I was doing that was because Ventesta was more or less a free +1. However, there's two things I've realized about the Rezael since then that's forced me to switch it out. One, the soul charge freaking sucks. Yeah, it technically means that you go net neutral in the soul, and yes, you do use soul a lot in this deck, and also yes, if you happen to soul charge a critical trigger, you can just throw it back in. But for all the times that you soul charge a PG, or maybe a front trigger, or by god, the over trigger, it just really hurts. And to be completely frank, the other big reason why I decided to cycle out Ventesta is because it's not a very impactful +1. I mentioned in Levy Dress with Score Piercer before, but not all pluses are created equal, and in this case, getting a generic 10k booster / attacker is not enough for the state of the deck currently. It just doesn't do enough for you, and there's only one kind of unit that would like to have that booster, which is going to be a 13k base attacker, which we only have a couple, so it's not a huge part of our winning image, and we just have better boosters all around between Gown, Painkiller, Aerial Sage, either for better numbers or more plussing and advantage. So for all those reasons, I'm going to move over to Tranquilia instead, which allows you to look at the top 5 cards of the deck and call a grade 1 or less unit from among them, or if you couldn't call a grade 1 or less off the top 5 or just chose not to, which is totally an option by the way, you can call her instead. So, or him, I'm not actually sure. But anyway, so Tranquilia here is still a +1 regardless, and yes, this one technically is a soul for it, but considering that it gives you the option to dig into one of your more hyper impactful pieces, and if you happen to dig into a Blade Feather Dragon, that'll be able to go in the soul for some power and then fill up your soul anyway, you're looking at a pretty good pool of cards to choose from with Tranquilia, and it tends to be rather consistent, so that's why I opted for this as the grade 1 ride line. You can choose a few different options, of course, but this one was the most versatile one and it worked best for me. Moving on to the grade 2, we still got the old faithful Knight of Great Advance Ascensior. Has the skill to call a grade 2 or less where you ride over it with the Rezael, which could be either Rezael, and this has a very versatile kind of call skill, right? So just use it for whatever you need at the moment. Just be sure that when you're discarding from the ride line, keep this skill in mind for what you'll like to call over, because there's a few really good targets here. And then for the grade 3, we're gonna run the Kiseki no Unmesha Rezael. So I know this is kind of a debate in the community right now, which Rezael to run currently. Some opt for the Kiseki no Unmeo, which is the upgraded version, because it gives you a faster game plan. If you happen to high roll the Unmesha in the hand, then you can get 3 calls as soon as Lickety Split, and one of them can even be a grade 3, even if you don't have high damage, right? So one of those calls actually ignores your damage stipulation, which is a very powerful rush ability. And if you happen to go second with it, then you're also able to give 5,000 power to the units that you call. So really good clapback. It's very fast, and I think for more order engine based kind of builds, they may just opt for that because the enhanced digging power and the faster blueprint just all meshes together very well. However, I opted for the Fated One of Miracles instead of the Fated King of Miracles. The reason being is, one, Rezael is still really good going first because it allows you to call cards regardless, and Umeo didn't really expand on that very much unless you have a Rezael in the hand, and unlike Umeo, you don't need to see Jack Shiznit to get your full value. With Unmesha right on the Vanguard circle, when you cross Persona Ride into the King, you'll be able to actually get its skills. You can get its Divine skill, which you can pop on turn 4, and you can also get the enhanced power up for your Vanguard. So it's just way more consistent in my opinion. There's no need to rely on an unstable blueprint when one of Rezael's biggest strengths of the deck is that it's incredibly stable as a deck. So why add instability to something that doesn't want instability, right? So another thing about Rezael to note is that its Divine skill is still just as versatile as ever. You can wait, of course, and then your king will be able to inherit its effect, but you can also shotgun this skill for the drive for immediate clapback, and if you happen to see a lot of critical triggers, you can get that value there. But of course, it also gives you the safety net of the miracle heal, so even if you're going up against a hyper-aggressive game plan, like let's say Vanguard Rakshasa and they win first, you can shotgun this in order to have that safety net just to get you to turn 4. Because the later the game goes, the more it is in your favor because you're inherently oriented towards the attrition game plan. So for all those reasons, I'm going to be running the Fated One of Miracles Rezael in the right deck, but you can opt for the more hyper-speed game plan of Fated King if you're willing to take the risk. Now moving on to the main deck, we're going to be running 4 copies of Kiseki no Unmeo Rezael Vita. Now he has 2 skills, the first one being the generic king skills we've come to find, which is continuous in the Vanguard circle. This unit is also regarded as Fated One of Miracles Rezael, and during your turn, this unit gets 5,000 power for each Fated One of Miracles Rezael on your soul and all their Divine skill. Note, this means that it gets 5,000 for each OG Rezael. When you're putting in Vitas, it's not going to give it the power up. This is a mistake that people have made, but it only counts the OG. Furthermore, it has the second skill of auto on the Vanguard circle. When it attacks a Vanguard, you can counterblast when you choose up to 2 cards from your drop with different grades and a total grade less than or equal to the number of cards in your damage zone and call them the rear circle. This is basically copy and pasted from original Rezael for reference. Then, here comes the new stuff. Cost. Put a grade 3 or greater card with Rezael and its card name from hand into soul. Choose a grade 3 or less card from your drop and call it to rear circle. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, all the units called by this effect get 5,000 power to end of turn. Now, the benefits of this are massive and already explained when I was discussing the Fated One of Miracles. When you're calling this extra third card, it is irrespective of whatever 2 you already called and the damage in your damage zone. So, for instance, let's say you're on 2 damage and you called like a grade 2 and a grade 0. You can use this skill to still call a grade 3. Similarly, let's say that you already have a pretty good front row, right? And so you're at 3 damage, you call a 2 and a 1, but you don't want to call another front row unit. You don't gotta. You can put a card from hand to soul and just call another grade 1 because it doesn't have to match the grades, or rather be different grades from what you call, and it doesn't have to care about the damage zone. So an extremely versatile third call. Then if you happen to be going second, the power-ups that you get from these is a cumulative 15k total, not including whatever power-ups they get, of which you have a lot of pretty nice attackers and boosters like Sargown, Aerial Sage, Nilberis, Nobia. If you're running the Order engine, you've got Taithfall. We have the brand new Gabwelius that we're going to get to in just a second. There's a lot of really good beatdown here, and this just enhances on that by a lot. So overall, a very versatile card, just like the original was very versatile. Rezael here could be used in a myriad of different situations, and it is just a mandatory 4 at this point. It's very nice to be able to run 4 Persona rides without actually having to use the Gradius Cradle, because that opens up a Regardless piece slot for another Regardless piece, which you guys might know what that is because I use this in basically every deck. But anyway, that's going to be enough about Vita. Now, in part and parcel with Vita, we're going to be running 3 OG Rezael in the deck as well. This doesn't just give you access to more fuel for Vita, which is so important, by the way, because being able to put in for that third call is huge to your finishing game plan. But this also means that if for some reason you didn't hit Vita just because you're extremely unlucky, you're able to Persona ride another Rezael to still get your Personas. So this deck actually has 7 Persona ride targets, if you can believe it. And if that wasn't enough, Vita gets the name of the Fated One of Miracles Rezael. So if you were to have to cross ride back into OG Rezael, you would still receive the Persona ride. So that means that in all told, you do have 7 Persona rides that are interchangeable with each other. It's a very, very good thing too, because Rezael was lacking in power and very Persona ride dependent in order to clean out games, because it was more defensive than offensive at base, right? So being able to have 7 Persona ride copies means that you'll be able to consistently smash down against your opponent in the follow-up turns. So yeah, just 3 up here for fuel and for extra Persona, no debate about it. Then the last grade 2 unit is going to be 2 of Blest Dragon Gabwelius. Ah, what a hype card from the anime, am I right, guys? Now, this card is very good for this deck. It was basically tailor-made for Rezael, but could also actually be played in Immorta, but that's besides the point, right? Now, Blessed Dragon has 2 skills. Auto, when this unit is placed on rear circle, you can Soul Blast one to look at the top card of your deck and put it on the top or bottom of your deck. If you put it on the bottom of your deck, this unit gets 5,000 power until end of turn. Furthermore, auto on the rear circle, when this unit attacks, if your damage zone has 4 or more cards, this unit gets 5,000 power, but if this unit was placed on rear circle by the ability of your Vanguard with Fated 1 in its card name this turn, and no drive checks were performed for the battle that your rear guard attacked this turn, guess what that means? Cost Counterblast 1. This unit gets 10,000 power and drive -1 instead of 5,000 power, and performs drive checks. Holy crap. Yeah, this card is freaking phenomenal. Being able to stack the deck is already a good start because we already have a lot of use case for that with Rezael, being able to stack the deck to guarantee your offensive triggers, of course, maybe dig into some crits, but also try to guarantee the miracle when you're trying to go on the defensive, right? So this is a super versatile skill just like Nilberis, but the Soul Blast is like even easier because Soul is something that you can build up quite a lot. So being able to Soul Blast for this every turn is quite nice. This is also just a generic effect, so you can just Soul Blast when you place it during the main phase. You don't have to wait for Rezael's ability in order to utilize this skill. Furthermore, if you're at the limit break condition, this can effectively be a 23k beater by itself, 33 on a Persona ride, which is already pretty big, but then it becomes like a 38k beater, if not more, depending on what's boosting it, if you gave any trigger effects to it, and the drive check. Now, Counterblast is not that big of an issue in Rezael. The only main Counterblaster that you have in this deck is Rezael. You do have a potential to Counterblast for a couple other cards, like Nobia, for instance, to refill your field, or if you're running Order Engine, then you'll Counterblast for the Order itself. But still, Counterblast is quite easy, especially because Aerial Sage can countercharge you every single turn. So, being able to have a really high impact Counterblast like this from Gabwelius for a +1 that also pressures for more triggers, of which you're definitely probably going to see triggers because you call a lot from the deck, and also deck compressed with the Divine skill. Very, very harsh speeder. Definitely power creeping what Gigantic Master brought to the table, and it's also just overall more worthy compared to Sages, because even though Sages has some really good versatility, perhaps more versatile than Gabwelius, Gabwelius enhances your overall winning image to a much greater degree than any of the other grade 3s that came before it. So yeah, I'm only running it at 2 because this deck is very good at digging for pieces, so you should be able to see it by the time that you need it, which is going to be the late game, because it only needs 4 or more damage to really get going, which you can take damage easy if you want to turbo out Gabwelius, but I would suggest try to hold on until turn 4 at least before you're starting to gab up. But technically it doesn't care what grade your opponent is, so if for some reason they push you all the way up to 4, you can clap back with this pretty easily. Now the final grade 3 of the deck is the regardless piece, which is, say it with me folks, Radiance Caliburn. I've already explained this a lot, so I'm not even going to really explain the effects. It's just either pot of greed or put in the soul and countercharge. It's as simple as that. It's just as versatile as the rest of this deck. Whether you need card advantage or resources, it's got it there for you. Now moving on to the grade 2s, we've got Knight of Bowstreaks Nilberis as a 4-of. Now Nilberis came out in set 2, and oh my god, this tripleware is so good. Being able to get you plussing, deck manipulation, it provides you extra soul mid-battle, it's a 20k beater, and to top it all off, it has the coveted Nil Pale combo, as I like to call it, which is Nilberis plus Painkiller Angel, which you are definitely going to be running in this deck, because them together makes a really good column power line that can also mutually put each other into the drop zone to then be res again with Rezael Vita. So very similar to the Sergown Cadwalla package, but potentially even more power to it, and it's not reliant on being able to see an order or having more rear guards than your opponent. So if you didn't see an order and your opponent's field is full, you can still do the Nil Pill combo. It's incredibly reliable that way. So yeah, just honestly one of the most faithful friends you can have in this freaking deck, a staple 4-of, although you could reduce it down to 3 if you feel like you wanted to up on the following grade sheets we're going to talk about. Now next up is the person we were just talking about, which is Knight of Piercing Cadwalla. Cadwalla just fetches you out more cards. This is tradition, so it is a break even for a Soul Blast, which is always nice because it just deck thins even more. The one new thing about Cadwalla that I want to talk about is that its ability to add a grade 2 or greater unit is more important than ever, because it can actually fetch you Rezaels in order to get your skill off to its full capacity. Because even if you don't see a Rezael in the moment, let's say for instance that you have Vita, right? But you didn't see OG Rezael or just another Vita, because you can't put another Vita and still get the same basic effect from it, right? So what you could do is you use Cadwalla beforehand during your first or second attack, you fetch a Rezael off it, and then swing with Rezael and put it into Soul for the full revival effect. So yeah, a really good bit of synergy there with Cadwalla. She just like, he or she, again, I'm sorry, just like Tranquilia, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, they're just as valuable as they were before, if not even more so because of the new winning image of this deck. Finally, we're running a couple copies of Knight of Gentle Beauty Nobia. Nobia, a pretty simple card, has been a good triple rare since BTO1. You just tutor a card off the top 3 for a counterblast, and then it can be a 20k plus beater if you soul blast. So it is a little bit of an energy guzzler, I must admit, not actually energy blasting, but with your other 2 resources. But it is definitely worth it because depending on how fast the game plan is going, you're definitely going to need Nobia in order to build back your board, which is why I've been tempted to try and bump it up by 1 by taking Nilberis down to 3 and just having a 3 split between the 3 different grade 2s that you'll be running. But I've noticed that sometimes Nobia is just a rather redundant card, and as long as you see 1 or 2, that's good enough. So we're going to be running her at 2 for the time being. Now moving on to the grade 1s, these are some pretty killer grade 1s. First off is Aerial Sage. This is just your counter charger, albeit it's a discard 1. But one thing I liked about this particular counter charger is that its discard can actually come in handy for the Vita skill, because let's say that you happen to have something in the hand, like let's say a Gabwelius, right? But you never had a chance to get Gabwelius in the drop zone, particularly because it actually doesn't have a skill to put itself in the drop zone. You have to get rid of it, or your opponent has to get rid of it for you, right? So what you can do is, if you have Gabwelius in the hand, you can keep it in the hand, right? And rather than call it during the main phase and just have it stick there for no apparent reason, you can actually discard it off Aerial Sage so that when it's revived by Rezael, it can get its full effect. So a really nice little bit of combo there. But aside from that, Aerial Sage is just a strong booster that also gives you a good counter charge. Next up is Saragown. There's no real need to explain this guy. Saragown is possibly the best card as a generic for Keter Sanctuary. Just gets you 1 of 2 cards from the top and is a really strong booster. He's a good boy. Then finally, for grade 1 normals, we've got Painkiller Angel. Also a really simple card. After its boost, you Soul Blast Retire to draw a card. As I said before, this is integral for the Nil Pill combo because it gets you like more advantage converting from field to hand, which you can then revive back with Vita. So this is actually my preferred combo versus the Saragown Cadwalla combo because it's more reliable. And because of the deck stacking with Nil Pill, you can actually manipulate what cards you're going to draw with Painkiller potentially. Because if you look at the top card of the deck, and it's something that you don't want to draw off Painkiller, you can bot deck it and try again, right? And one nice little facet of this combo is that Gabwelius actually enhances this combo, because after you're doing the Nil Pill and you do the whole top deck, bot deck kind of thing and draw with it, you normally wouldn't know what your top card is for Rezael Vita because Painkiller would have drawn it, right? So what you do is then after you do this effect, you swing with Rezael Vita, then you use the skill of Gabwelius to Soul Blast and restack your deck. So Gabwelius actually lets you keep the deck stacked while also being able to get your Nil Pill combo off in its entirety. So yeah, you basically got your cake and ate it too. Beautiful. Then for generics, we're going to, of course, be running 4 PGs, one of them being Elementary Sanctitude, no questions here. Then for crits, we're going to run 8 crits, which is the maximum crits you can run. If you could run more, I would definitely run more, because this deck is all about crits, baby. 4 of them have to be Blade Feather Dragon, because Blade Feather Dragon is super useful in Rezael in particular, because it's a booster that can actually have a kind of useful 2k effect, and building Soul to then be Soul Blasted and shuffled with later by the Divine skill is Hyper Pog. Then we're going to be running 4 regular heal triggers. We don't need to run any fancy heals here. I'd rather keep the stable trigger, right? Because the entire premise of this deck is maximum stability. Then we're going to be running 3 Alpac for front triggers because 20k shield is quite healthy, and you should generally be able to have a full front row benefit from the heal trigger because of your revivals. Then finally, for over trigger, we'll be running Spiritual King of Night Sky, Nixelia. This one is in hot debate with Idol's Faro because Idol's Faro gave you a 9th crit in addition to being able to take back anything from your drop to the hand, which could be quite nice because you could recycle a Rezael off of it. So it was close, but Nyx also lets you recycle back cards from your damage zone to your hand, which is an area that is even less accessible than the drop zone. So you could actually fetch something really important like a Regardless piece, a PG, heck, a Rezael they happen to damage check, unfortunately. So it's just as good as Idol's Faro in the recycling capacity, but where it edges out is its an ability to actually call a card from the hand. Because depending on what you're calling, right, you should actually be able to go for even more multi-attack combo. Now that might actually be a little bit weird because you would look at this and say, well, you should be having a front row that's standing. So what do you mean get an extra multi-attack, Godsman? Well, what I mean is that let's say that you actually drive check this off of Gabwelius, right? Gabwelius can actually then use Nixelia to call over itself. This is important because let's say they PG the Gabwelius. You can then call over the Gabwelius during the drive check and just do another attack, which is really pog because they already PG'd for the Gabwelius. It wasn't going to hit anyway, so you might as well overcall it and try again. Alternatively, because you're converting running a lot of your columns, even if you don't have a multi-attack off of this, you can still call a very strong booster like another Sargon or another Painkiller and be able to have a more substantial attack. Plus the 100 million and the ability to effectively heal down and get a +1 anyway just all adds to your more mid-range game plan at the end of the day. So yeah, even though it was a very, very tight race at Iosfaro, and I wouldn't blame you at all, ladies and gentlemen, if you tried to run the blue OT instead, I'm going to take purple OT because of the benefits of healing and the more exclusive plussing. And that was all for this deck list. I must say, Rezael Vita is looking astonishing for the set 5 format. Although I fully imagine that the order version of this deck is going to end up taking the spotlight as the premier way to play it in the competitive scene, I found this version to be a lot more fun while still being able to take on basically anything else in the format, because the base of Rezael is so high to begin with that realistically speaking, it doesn't matter too much in my opinion. And with this version of the deck, you actually do have more stability, so you're not actually going to be running into potential consistency issues, which is huge because when I play my Keter deck, I want it to be as consistent as freaking possible, because that's basically what the nation is all about, ladies and gentlemen, consistency. So that's where we're going to be leaving with Vita for the day. Overall, let's go ahead and start talking about grades. So looking at the grades, we're going to start with power. Power gets a really high 4 out of 5. You got 5 attacks. There's going to be a fair bit of numbers coming from Gabwelius, Nilberis, Nobia, what have you. And if that wasn't enough, you'll also be able to get an extra bit of drive checking from the Divine Skill and from Gabwelius, so you have extra drive pressure there. There's only one thing that's really stopping Rezael from being able to have a 5 out of 5 with power, which is that on the turn 3 especially, right, you may not have enough damage to really go for 5 attacks, and your numbers aren't going to be hyper substantial. Furthermore, Gabwelius requires you to be at 4 or more damage, so your damage zone is a limiter to your overall power output, so you could try to take a lot of damage and just push as hard as humanly possible, but that may not work out for you. Plus, this deck is still somewhat Persona Ride reliant in order to consistently hit above numbers. So overall, even though it's a very, very powerful deck, I think there's a couple of choke points here between the Persona and more particularly the damage that keeps it from being just the huge 5 out of 5 like some decks like Bastion or Caliburn would be. Now, moving on to defense, on the other hand, a perfect 5 out of 5, because this deck doesn't just have a bajillion cards in the hand from all the field conversion, but also this deck has the access to Divine Skill. A Miracle Heal is incredibly powerful. So you just without even considering it, right, you could just have to take a 6 damage, and if that heals you out, that is a game changer. This is a game-changing benefit that you could just get online as soon as turn 3, so you don't have to wait for it. If you want to shotgun the Divine Skill and not put back hardly any criticals, that is perfectly sourceable. The heal on its own is already super powerful. And if that wasn't enough, you do have loads of other defensive options that you could throw into this deck aside from just raw card advantage, such as the Church Order engine if you're trying to opt for Hostage Rezael. And Hostage Rezael in particular has a super good benefit defensively because it can run Liel Immorta, which is effectively another 4 PGs for you that can also recycle back the cards you bind so that you can have an attrition-based game plan unlike any other. So yeah, this deck just perfect 5 out of 5 in that department. Consistency is also going to get a 5 out of 5 because there's basically nothing that you can't see in Rezael at this point, right? Rezael has access to recursion type pieces, dig type pieces, search type pieces, and draw type pieces. So it doesn't matter what kind of advantage you're looking for, whether it be hard drawing or digging, you can do it. Sargon searches, Painkiller digs, Nobia searches, Nilberis digs, Cadwalla searches, Caliburn digs, Gabwelius digs, Vita revives more diggers and searchers and drawers. Like, you see what I mean? There is basically no card in this deck that's not a consistency piece aside from Aerial Sage. Like, that is literally it. Everything else in this deck is meant to help you get cards. So yeah, 5 out of 5 consistency, it's hard to debate otherwise. Recovery is also going to get a 5 out of 5 because this is a card that can revive 3 cards from the drop zone every single turn. And if that wasn't enough, you can also dig a lot of cards in the hand, which means that you're seeing other pieces to then push back on the next turn. So yeah, its recovery is probably its claim to fame, if anything, right? He is the Archangel who revives the dead and heals all wounds. So yeah, there's no doubt about it. Rezael gets the 5 in that department. Economy is also going to get, you guessed it, a 5 out of 5 because you don't need energy for anything super important aside from Nilberis, we could just use once per turn. So energy is solved for you right there. Soul is super easy because you can build Soul through a myriad of sources and also filter it back out. So like Nilberis can build you Soul, Radiance Caliburn builds you Soul, If you choose to run other soul builders like Turnar, you can build soul that way. You can even build soul with Blade Feather Dragon if you so choose. So that's a super easy resource. Counterblast is an easy resource. You can countercharge with Aerial Sage. You can countercharge with Dragown, which came out in set 2. Turnar is still there if you want to countercharge that way. So that economy is set for you. And we don't even need to talk about card economy, ladies and gentlemen. We already know that this deck gets a bajillion cards, right? So just a perfect 5 out of 5 in that department. Man, these grades are crazy right now, right? But thankfully, control is only going to get a 2 out of 5, right? Rezael runs basically no control. However, it does have a couple pretty nice control elements in the form of Blessing, and also the Phalanx if you want to run that particular order, because things like Phalanx and Downward Sword of Judgment can get you like good bot decks, and then Blessing is also an even more powerful bot decker. And this is important because there's a lot of decks these days that can actually recur things from the drops into the field. Think like a few of the destined ones like El Calibra or Levy Dress or whatnot, right? So Blethyn's ability to be able to put cards back from both the drop zone and the field to the bottom of the deck is super disruptive for them, so you can deny some really key pieces. Just recently in the Destined Showdown, I did such a maneuver against El Calibra and it effectively won me the game right there. Now, of course, the reason why it's still a 2 out of 5 is twofold. One, these are still basically the only good options, and bot decking isn't always the best removal, even though it is still usually better than retire. And you have to actively be running these. These aren't standard issue for most Rezael variants, so you'd have to make a meta call and bring these into your deck. So even though the deck definitely has control options, it doesn't generally utilize control options. And so in most case scenarios, you're just simply going to be swinging natty and hope for the best. And so as a result, I'm going to keep it very tempered at a 2 out of 5. However, the grades here are still very telling, and Rezael just sweeps the board with an A+ as a grade. This deck is super immaculate, hyper versatile, and there's nothing that this deck isn't really capable of. It's going to be one of the best decks in set 5 format without a shadow of a doubt. And given that it's still going to be a protagonist deck at the end of the day, it has room to grow even from this point onward. So definitely, fellas, if you haven't invested in Rezael, now's your chance to do so, because the Fated King is going to descend and bring about the best possible future for all. Thank you for watching. If you did like this deck, then be sure to check out my other deck profiles down in my channel below. We also do all sorts of kind of Vanguard content, so we're talking top 10s, tier lists, discussions, fight nights, the whole shebang, so check them out. If you like what you see, consider leaving a subscribe. And with that said, take care, God bless.